Welcome to this inaugural first edition of What's Brewing at Eden, reflecting on 175 years of our mission as a school of the church. And I can't think of a better friend and colleague to Eden Seminary, and to me personally, than the Reverend Dr. Jesse Williams to join in this conversation and to share in this opportunity to reflect on how Eden's history bears testimony to our calling and how God has provided for that calling over these many years. And I'm going to go ahead and, in addition to welcoming Reverend Dr. Jesse T. Williams to this space, to introduce him. And he really is someone to most of you who needs no introduction. And that's because he has been a student, a faculty person, a Board of Trustees member, and an alum of this great seminary. And he has done that over the last, oh my gosh, Jesse, when did you first graduate from Eden? In 1980?
89. Yeah,
1989. And so that is 34 years. So that's a remarkable amount of history just unto yourself. But when you think about all those different roles and all those different perspectives, you've really made the most of your time. And so thank you for taking this time to be with us. Reverend Dr. Jesse T. Williams is currently the fourth distinguished senior pastor of Convent Avenue Baptist Church in Harlem of New York City. And prior to that, he served as the pastor of Washington Tabernacle Church here in St. Louis. And he has been just recently called to serve as the president of the Lot Carey Mission Society, and we are thrilled for that calling for him because that really brings so many aspects of his leadership, his scholarship, his pastoral, theological leadership to bear to serve that great organization of the church. And I understand, Dr. Williams, that you're about to be commissioned into that position. So that's very exciting. And Reverend Dr. Williams is also married to the wonderful Jelaine Williams and is father to Jesse T. Williams III. And we're sending them all our best and all our love. And just thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Deb. Really honored to be here.
All right, so I thought we would begin this inaugural episode of What's Brewing at Eden with some reflection with you. And I've really enjoyed this in the work I've been able to do with you as president in your role on the Board of Trustees, where you currently serve as the vice chair of the Board of Trustees. So in leadership, in your second term, so you've already served a 12-year term, and we begged you to come back, and you graciously agreed. And so now you're in the beginning of your second 12-year term, and this is really just a great opportunity to think with you in that position and others about the history of the school and the mission of the school. So Eden Seminary is a seminary of the German evangelical tradition, part of which bears a pietistic heritage that comes to a project like a 175th year anniversary with a bit of more humility than might be the case in some institutions. And I think a big anniversary like this, which you know, evokes all kinds of opportunity for reflecting on the mission and purpose of the institution, can kind of draw out our propensity to want to tell some pretty heroic tales about ourselves. And while there is a lot about Eden's history and mission that we should be very proud about, and that we should thank God for with absolute celebration, there are parts of it that if we look with care, we can see the edges, and as we have said graciously in theological education, the growing edges of our vision, where in fact God is calling us to be more just, more inclusive, more open. And at the opening of our convocation this year, for our 175th year, I shared some words with the students, faculty, and staff, and returning students to lift up this dynamic in our history, of which we should be very proud, but also that brings us to reflect. So I'm going to go ahead and share just a little bit of that, 3 vignettes essentially from our history featuring 3 students, now alumni. In the early 1930s, an AME pastor named Joseph Gomez, collaborating with the NAACP to challenge practices of institutional racial segregation, applied to Eden Seminary and was rejected. He fully anticipated this disappointing outcome, but because he could see beyond the institution's limited imagination into God's vision of what it means to be a school of the church, he, along with the local NAACP, challenged his denial in the court of public opinion, publishing a letter challenging the seminary about its practice of segregation. The faculty immediately reconvened to consider his application anew, as in fact he more than met the criteria as a candidate for Christian ministry. Reverend Gomez was then admitted and graduated as the first African American to have attended a predominantly white institution in the state of Missouri in 1933. Decades before St. Louis University and Washington University would do the same. Reverend Gomez, who rose to become Bishop Gomez of the AME, had a theological imagination that led Eden's purpose in God's calling. Decades later, in the 1980s, J.Mo Oxford, an Eden graduate of 1989, who offered our convocation address last year, attended Eden Seminary and pursued ordination within the United Church of Christ as an openly gay and partnered person. J.Mo, whose pronouns are they, zer, courageously embodied their calling and faith that they are a child of God. Faculty and students of the seminary stood with J.Mo and advocated for their ordination in the UCC. Tragically, this effort was not successful, but Eden's next steps over the 1990s and 2000s to embrace the vision of being an open and affirming seminary of the UCC, hiring our first out gay faculty member and dean in Reverend Dr. Jaretta Marshall, and in embracing the denomination's call for marriage equality, was catalyzed by J.Mo's courage, faithfulness, and leadership. J.Mo had a theological imagination that led Eden's purpose in God's calling. In 2014, a recent Eden alum, Tracy Blackman, serving as pastor of Christ the King United Church of Christ in Florissant, Missouri, made a series of phone calls to St. Louis religious leaders on Saturday night, August 9th, following the police killing of an unarmed Black teenager named Michael Brown Jr. in Ferguson, Missouri. One of those calls was to me as Eden's then academic dean and professor of New Testament. Deb, we need you and any Eden people you can bring to pray in the Ferguson Police Department parking lot tomorrow after church. I promise you, as sickened as I was by the news of that horrible killing, I would not have crossed the intentionally structured web of dozens of municipalities between Webster Groves and Ferguson if Tracy had not made that call. I know I am not alone. And over the next years, Tracy, along with her alumni colleagues like Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould and Reverend Dr. Starsky Wilson, would continue to call religious leaders in St. Louis, inclusive of the Eden community, into a broader theological imagination of our purpose and God's calling. The prophetic vision of Black Lives Matter would challenge the seminary's tacit participation in structural racism and call us into deeper faithfulness and understanding of to whom and with whom we all belong. So, Jesse, as I reflect on those three stories, those people were all students.
Yes, absolutely.
And I wonder if there's anything about that role in the community of staff, faculty, trustee, all alumni, all the different roles people have in an institution. What do students bring to the mission of the seminary and to its theological imagination?
Yeah, well, obviously they are catalysts for these transformational moments that happen within the culture of the seminary. Students come in new and they bring that edge with them. Not always with all of the critical skills that seminary teaches them, but they bring that imagination, that fresh imagination from what they've experienced in the culture, and they dialogue about it within the seminary and live it outside of the walls of the seminary. So, I think it's no surprise that students have been the ones that have really helped us move toward these transformational moments. And all three of those are very just real pivotal moments with different issues that, each context is slightly different historically and socially. But nonetheless, it takes the voice of just one student to start the ball rolling and get the entire seminary community to begin thinking differently, and to, if you're doing it with integrity, to think critically about what we believe, what we think we believe, and why, and then to come to the conclusion, well, there may be more to it than what we think and believe, and there's another way of viewing that. And that's why having diversity within the student body is such an incredible gift, because it plays out not only in the classroom as students dialogue with one another, but also in the way they see one another living it outside of the walls of the seminary. So it's really a tremendous gift, and our students really are some really bright, passionate individuals that live that, and all three of those are examples. And there are other unwritten examples. You
Absolutely.
know,
Other
I know,
written and
I
unwritten.
know
Yeah.
you know them, and I know them as well, of many students who've come and they've had to uh, shift themselves and then help the community to shift as well in its understanding of what the church is and who God is and what we're called to be.
That's the thing about a theological imagination is it's an imagination that is open to more,
Yes.
to deeper understanding, to the possibility of being limited or missing something. And I think in our broader culture, that is more and more a rare thing, unfortunately. But a theological imagination really does have the gift of that, of the least of these or the marginal perspective bearing a truth that can reform the whole.
Yeah. And a real theological imagination has to be willing to risk transformation. You've got to be, once you engage someone who is quote unquote the other, or someone who is not like me, I have to have an openness to be willing to be transformed as a part of this dialogue that we're in. And I think that's how human relationships should work. But you're absolutely right. It seems almost as if in our culture nowadays that we've reverted backwards in some ways in the larger culture. But that's why it's good to have a place like seminary, like Eden Seminary, that is not afraid to take on issues where we might be transformed, because
Right.
we're different. Even after 175 years, Eden's different because of the three examples that you highlighted, and uh, particularly, I was thinking back as you were talking. Uh, Jeanette and JMO and I
Uh-huh.
overlapped a little bit during my seminary time, or I remember her on campus, and I remember uh, seeing and hearing her articulate her struggle and what she was going through. And so that was an area of learning about uh, the image of God in all people,
Amen.
and what that means and how to articulate that, and what type of sensitivity and support a community, not just a seminary community, but the community at large should have as well. So, and of course, I know, I know Tracy, and I know many people who are involved in the movement surrounding the tragedy of Michael Brown. I was in New York by then, but I heard it and was able to resonate with the people who were telling me what was going on there, and seeing it on the news for myself. So um, there has to be some risk in a theological or prophetic imagination. And we've heard it and we've seen it from people throughout the history of this country who have the courage to do so. And I'm just glad that we foster that and encourage that within the Eden community.
Yeah, I mean, I think about your role as a trustee and my role as a president.
Hmm.
When I can be tempted or lured into a posture in my current role that when a problem or a complaint or what seems like somebody pointing out a limitation comes up, I can be defensive.
Yeah,
And I think that's an institutional liability of leadership, right?
yeah, yes.
And I think the way students have been playing a role in this history, when we reflect on it this way again and again, being that leaven, being
Hmm.
that agent of transformation, I'm challenged to start really practicing a discipline of reframing that habit to say, wait a minute, and be in that institutionally vested defensive space, and to lean in and say, no, this is where God is talking. This is where God
Yes.
is speaking to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it can be hard.
Right. And allowing that to be facilitated. But you referred earlier that I spent some time on faculty, with you and others and on the faculty table, and then chaired faculty and curriculum on the board for a lot of years, where you and I worked very closely together, hand in hand. And I think the faculty as well. And then when we started doing faculty searches for new individuals, we were looking for people who had that type of theological and prophetic imagination, and had the openness to be willing to say, in the classroom, we challenge our students to think critically, but we acknowledge that it is a learning environment for all of us who are in the classroom. And so, although the professor is the most credentialed person in the room, um, there was always a lot of mutual learning, that our faculty are not afraid to own the fact that as they listen to students talk, they glean some things as well. They learn some valuable lessons and insights that can come back and really pay major dividends. Like, you were Tracy's dean. One of the and she's calling you and reaching out to you, and pulling the seminary into this new expression of racial justice
Yes.
standing, and what it means to really be prophetic. And so, the fact that we have faculty, and that we search for faculty that have that type of heart for learning in the classroom, and that it's collegial, that it's mutual, that there's an exchange of experiences and knowledge, I think is another tremendous gift that we have within Eden. And it's rare, because there are a lot of seminaries around the country where that they just want you to come in their classroom and they say, this is your knowledge. This is the way it is. Don't just accept it, and they just feed people knowledge as if that's the only thing. But a seminary education is about more than just acquiring facts or learning technical things. It's about application, and it's about learning with theological integrity, as I call it.
Yeah, and I think when you think about like what you've just been naming, we've been talking a lot in the last few years as we become more digitally engaged. We've been talking about this as our blended community of learning, but in some ways the community's always been blended, because
Yeah.
it's always been open to the insights and perspective of all participants. I think that is a value of how we teach at Eden. I remember learning from Karen Tai, who was our professor of religious education when I came on the faculty. I remember learning from her this idea of the banking model of education, which you've just described. I, the professor, have the knowledge, and I'm going to deposit it in you, as opposed to a more Paulo Freirean, pedagogy of the oppressed, a community of people who gather together and share knowledge in community. And I think that really has been a part of how we've embraced the liberative theological traditions and movements that are a part of the historical ethos of the seminary and a part of our ongoing mission.
Hmm.
Jesse, we're coming. I've talked so much and used so much of the time, and you've been so gracious. We're coming to the end of our time, but I have a question that I want to pose to you about. We've done 175 years in our mission. Where do you see Eden going in the next 175 years in this project of liberative theological education in blended community of faith, open to the wisdom and perspective of all participants? Where do you see us going?
Wow. What a question. It's we're already having conversations about the way we transfer knowledge, and we're of course virtual now, and we're a community that's not necessarily geographical. It's global now. I'm asking the same questions as a pastor in the church now that is probably getting close to the end of my tenure, but I'm asking questions like, what's going to be the role of AI and artificial intelligence in the church and in the seminary, and what are we going to do with that? These are questions. I don't have answers
Right.
because these are questions, and the role of technology, things like that. Um, my hope is in 175 years we can be more proactive on some issues as opposed to being reactive. I would especially like to see the church and the seminary, and I'm talking about them hand in hand because I think they are hand in hand.
Yeah.
The church and the seminary having a greater impact on proactively on issues of economic justice in the country, uh, financially. Uh, the big issue, another big issue that we're talking about a lot now, especially in New York, well, everywhere, is immigration and how we treat people who come in from other countries. And I hope that we're very reactive now, and I'm hoping that somehow, some way, the seminary and the church working together can create models where our graduates and alums and faculty are a part of proactive policy making and shaping in the country, as opposed to us having to react to tragedies all the time. I want us to be at the table and be um, shaping policy before that's going to get voted on and it's going to become a part of our social reality. So that's my hope. That's my hope for what Eden can be within the next 175 years.
I love
And
that. I love
huh?
that because I see a seed of that in the development in the last few years, and this is now all under the leadership of Reverend Dr. Dietra Wise Baker, the Center
Yes.
for Live Faith and Organizing, that has really brought us the gift into our degree and non-degree programming, the gift of integrating a consciousness and an awareness of community organizing and activism in the practice of ministry, so that
Yes.
these don't have to be separate things, but that a pastor of a congregation or a leader of a not-for-profit or a community minister can have equipping and knowledge of how to do just what you're talking about. Think in terms of the policy implications of the sources of suffering and pain in their
Yes.
community, and to equip the communities we lead to be agents of God's transformation and justice and love and mercy, rather than, as you say, always reacting to those
Yes.
sources of suffering and pain.
Yeah. I would add too, just another 2 cents worth. I think the definition of what it means to be a seminary alum is going to change and shift as time goes by. I don't think it's going to just simply be an MDiv and a DMin or an MTS, but we're going to have a lot more laity that come to seminary. And whether they graduate with one of those degrees or it's some other type of program that they're a part of, I think that's going to be a lot different. And that flies in the face of traditional understanding of what seminary and theological education is. But I think you're leading us in that way every day, and I think that's right, and that's the way it's going to go. So what it means to be educated by a seminary or a theological institution, that definition is going to shift, and I think shift quite a bit.
Well, more as much as you and I love theological education and know its magic, we know its joy, we know the power of it. I think we both have a passion for more and more people having access to that. And I think we can see how that can really empower the church and the proclamation of the gospel in the world. And that is a very exciting thing to think about Eden being about in the next 175 years. Jesse, thank you so much for taking this time and for being with me in this conversation. And we'll see what brews next as
All
we
right.
continue on. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Always great talking to you.
Great to talk to you.